Welcome to STR Pricing Secrets. This series is powered by Host Planet and Beyond, the global leader in revenue management for vacation rentals. This series is your go-to guide for mastering pricing strategies that maximize your earnings. Whether you're a seasoned host or just starting out, we'll break down the latest trends, expert insights, and actionable tips to help you boost occupancy, increase revenue, and stay ahead in the ever-changing short-term rental market. Ready to unlock the secrets to smarter pricing? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to STR Pricing Secrets. In today's episode, we're going to focus on the science behind Beyond's data-driven pricing. And joining me to share his extensive knowledge on this subject is Ryan Saylor, Beyond's Product Marketing Director. How's it going, Ryan?
Doing well over here, James. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Okay, then straight in then. Let's start with the magic behind the scenes. What actually powers Beyond's dynamic pricing?
Yeah, I mean, this is the question. I think we could talk about this for the better part of a couple hours if we really wanted to. But the short and sweet answer is, Beyond was the first dynamic pricing tool for short-term rentals in the industry. We obviously saw what was happening in hotels and airlines. They sort of really birthed the revenue management movement and the broader travel industry. But there were some nuances for short-term rentals. Obviously, very unique supply, pretty wild markets around the world, and ultimately a pretty fragmented ecosystem digitally. So from day one, we really had to be the ones, collecting our own data, analyzing it, cleaning it, and making sure we were confident in the data to be able to price somebody's short-term rental property. So from day one, we've been really, really focused on maintaining that source of data and understanding sort of the impacts that it has, not only on pricing, but just, the industry and individual markets in general. And, we really started before any of the big data aggregators in the market as well. So for a while, we really managed all of that on our own to power the dynamic pricing tool. And now we have actual data tools that people can use because we realized we were really sitting on this mountain of data that we could use and really showcase people. And I think 2020 was a big push for us in that arena. There was so much need for data that we said, well, we have it all, so why don't we share it? But yeah, it really all starts with day one. Over 12 years ago now, first starting to collect some of that data. And I think I want to call out here at the top too, there is a common misconception I come across a lot between hosts, property managers, revenue managers, that any sort of revenue management tool, any sort of property management tool, even that's offering sort of dynamic pricing or rates or anything, everybody's using the same data set for the exact same market. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Data sets across the board are so vastly different, not only in how they're sort of collected and started, but also how they're managed and optimized on a rolling basis. It's never really set it and forget it with the amount of data that we're seeing come in. So for us, owning our data pipeline has been very important because we know there are so many volatile things that could happen to a data source ultimately. So we really start with sort of key core data for Beyond, which is going to be source connected data from a lot of our partners informing what's happening in a market, truly what someone is paying for a property, how many people are staying, what's the booking window looking like. That rich data is able to give us a really great picture of any market, any street, any neighborhood, whatever it might be, coupled with some of the publicly scraped data we're able to get from online travel agencies like Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com. That data is ultimately a bit less valuable on the pricing side of things, just because from that information we're getting posted prices, not booked rates. So it's an assumption of what somebody think they could be booked at in the market, but not necessarily what a guest paid, which I think is really the core of revenue management. And then our third data pillar internally at Beyond is going to be search data. So that's something that we've introduced over the past couple years, where we're sort of understanding what people are searching for out in any given market. and how that can translate into our perception of demand ahead of time. So literally pulling, at a granular level, somebody going into a market on a direct booking website and saying, I want to stay in this market for 5 days over these specific days for these amenities with these guests. So we're able to get sort of an estimate of market demand before anybody books, which is super helpful when we have, changes in seasonality, crazy things coming out of the past couple of years in terms of supply, new events, and things like that. So sort of those 3 data pillars are really important and really core for us. And then our team, once we actually have all of that data internally, we do a ton of work with it. So there's a lot of processes behind the scenes that go into ensuring that, again, any of those for our pricing tool, any of the prices that we're pushing out are accurate, they're optimized. There's nothing wild in the data that's causing us to skew different pictures of demand. And internally, we call it our revenue management and data science team. And this team literally acts as like revenue managers for entire markets for Beyond users in that market against everybody else in the market. So it's kind of like this, like a guardian angel in our algorithm that is looking out for, how are all these Taylor Swift shows impacting demand? How is seasonality changing year over year? How is shoulder season shifting a little bit? Is day of week changing every single day? They're the ones really fine tuning some of this data. And what's cool about owning our own data pipeline is we've been able to set up alerts, many, many different types of alerts for all of our markets that we price in, where this revenue management team actually sits down every single day and at the beginning of the day kind of reviews like red flags in market data. So are we seeing like a crazy spike in bookings for, a date that we haven't seen before? What's going on there? Is it an event? Can we attribute it to something? How should that inform our pricing? Another good example of the work that this team does with our data is we hand launch every market that we price in. So even when I first started Beyond 6 years ago, we weren't 100% available globally or even in the US or even in Europe. We were hand launching markets based on the data that we have. And we would say we couldn't launch a market if we weren't confident in the data that we had actually for that market. So that team is also working on building markets, around the world, and then drilling down into, again, sort of those individual hyperlocal clusters or neighborhoods, and making sure that, those are making sense of the demand in the market as well. We certainly see changes here. Over the past 12 years, markets have grown, they've shrunken a little bit, they've changed. The difference between ski and ski out and being in a ski village or on the lake, all of these different market dynamics come into play where you can't just write algorithm rules to account for that. You have to have a human eye actually sort of building the data literally around like physical properties on a map. So I think that's really set us apart from day one from other tools in the industry or any other data aggregator in the industry, because we had to do it from day one. We weren't going to be confident being the first people to do dynamic pricing if we didn't have our eyes on these specific markets and actually monitoring what's going on in them. So that's the short version of basically our data philosophy on the pricing side of things. But yeah, it's been so important for us to be fully in control of that data and really understand how that shakes out for all of our users and making them more money year over year.
It's pretty fascinating. There was one term that you mentioned quite near the start of your answer there. You talked about cleaning the data. How do you clean the data?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into there too. A couple examples of things that we've come across, and these are literally things that we learned in the early days at Beyond, but also just, working through the past couple of years, things that we've come across. Some examples are, like 8 years ago, all of a sudden we started detecting massive spikes down in Florida for like February 1st. And so that starts to skew our demand and say, oh my gosh, the first day of February is always super, super high demand for some reason. Is it an event? What's going on? It ultimately was snowbirds setting their arrival dates for February 1st. So yes, it was demand, but it wasn't just demand for that day. And that's one thing that we learned. We have to understand when we're seeing that in certain markets to sort of lessen maybe the daily demand for that arrival date when we know it's more long-term, like seasonal travelers coming into a market. That's one example of what we see on sort of the even like the connected source partner data. A scrape data example might be the fact that we're scraping Booking.com, Airbnb, and VRBO. If we have one property that's listed on all 3 of those online channels in any given market, we want to make sure we're not counting that as 3 different properties. So we have to deduplicate each of those properties and kind of mash them into one to really understand what's happening for one specific property and to not over allocate demand. So that's one thing that we're constantly monitoring and saying, okay, we don't want to be saying that there's too many listings or too many properties in this market just because they're coming from different data sources. And there's a number of nuances with that. Do you use photos, the listing title, the coordinates? So it's a combination of a ton of different data points that we can use. But that's a lot of the cleanliness that we see come in. One other example, just to give you a concrete example, is we're able to look at basically like channel sources. So in any given market, are we seeing the majority of bookings come in on direct booking websites or directly over the phone? Or is it a market like Miami where we're seeing a ton actually come in on Airbnb and maybe a little bit on VRBO? What's interesting is we have, I think over 70 PMS channel connection partners, plus we're getting all this additional data from those online travel agencies. It's wild what like reservationists, what even guests can put in as far as their channel where they actually book their reservation. Literally, like the data is so messy that if somebody booked through Airbnb, it could be Airbnb as the source or Airbnb or airspace BNB, like literally cleaning millions of data sets on just like, how do we make sense of this data and categorize it into maybe like 10 channels instead of 50,000. So that's another example that we've come across over the years, but there's many more. And we've got, I think over 80 full-time employees working on like the product design and engineering side of things who are actually looking out for nuances in this data, depending on the market, the source, whatever it might be, and ultimately how that impacts our ability to price and support users in these markets.
You mentioned this before as well, that there is an assumption perhaps in the industry that the big dynamic pricing platforms are all quite similar and they're all getting the same data and stuff like that. But just explain to us how different they are and what really marks Beyond out. What are your USPs?
Yeah, I think specifically on the data piece, one thing we've really highlighted over the past couple of years is going back to that scrape data. In our assumption of market demand and then ultimately how we should price every single day for every unique listing in a market, we're really not using that scrape data, mostly for the reasons that I mentioned before. We like scraping a website literally means if I'm a human going to a website and I write down that this property is available for 200 pounds on this specific 2-day range, that's what we're scraping. So it's the posted price, it's whether the calendar is available or not available, and then maybe some information on amenities, maybe minimum stays, but nothing super detailed like we're getting from actual guest reservation information. So we wouldn't want to necessarily say that, okay, 6 months from now in London, for example, we're seeing a huge price increase on Airbnb for this specific day in this specific neighborhood. That might be an indication that other people in the market are sensing something's going on. Obviously, we're gut checking this with maybe events or holidays or anything else going on, but we don't want to necessarily take, some other hosts in the market and say, well, they're pricing high, therefore we should too. So we don't really use scrape data in our algorithm day to day. It has certainly been used over the years to sort of inform our perception of maybe supply in the market or high level like seasonality trends based on availability and then also pricing swings and curves. But because we really brought dynamic pricing first to the industry, we always said you don't want to just copy off your competitors off of the house down the street or whatever it might be, because who knows what they're using to price. Maybe they're just flat pricing and they don't really care, or they're not that involved with pricing their property. So why would you just want to look to them and what they're posting? So that really does set us apart. I think most other pricing tools rely a lot on scrape data. That also comes from, again, we hand launch every single market, but I'm pretty sure every other option available in the industry today really launched the world in a day. So they basically wrote rules around that scrape data to say, okay, let's scrape and sort of cluster these 500 listings together. We'll look at prices, and then we'll be able to price other listings based on the curve that we're seeing. That certainly helped them expand and support, every market around the world. But ultimately, then you have to add on a ton of customizations at the user level to say, ooh, I'm not actually, getting as much of a price increase for Christmas this year that I would have expected. So those are some of the things that users have come to us and say, like, can you fix this? Can you help? And over the past couple of years, we really have shifted away from using a lot of that scrape data and using better data sources that we have. So that's like the biggest example I have. And I think capping that off with sort of, again, the ownership of the data pipeline, because we own our data scrapers, the connected source data, the search data, we're able to like pivot and really, shift our strategy for the algorithm if anything were to happen. And what I mean by that is on the scrape data side of things, this was a couple of years ago now, but Airbnb actually made a huge change for everybody that scrapes their data, where you weren't able to get like the daily posted prices and availability. You had to essentially go in and actually like make a fake booking for 3, 4, 5 days, whatever, to get that daily level data. And, we had some non-Beyond customers come to us and say, hey, I was just made aware that my pricing tool hasn't updated prices for my market or data for the past couple of days because of that. Because they had to rely so much on scrape data, everything was paused for a couple of days, if not a couple of weeks, until they were able to figure out a fix on the scrape data side of things. So truly, like, our size of the database is able to help us pivot in those moments where we can still factor in demand and understand what's going on while we build our own solution for scrape data, and we don't have to pause all updates and really hold out to get a picture of the market. That was like the biggest example the past couple of years that a lot of people had some frustrations with, but because we've built and owned all that since day one, we were able to pivot a lot quickly.
It's really interesting what you mentioned there, where if you're comparing yourself to another rental that's not using dynamic pricing, I've never really thought of that before. It's quite an interesting thing to think about. I mean, how important is it to compare properties that are using dynamic pricing as opposed to those that are not, and they've just got maybe a seasonal rate? They've got one for summer, one for winter. Is it much more important to look at the rentals that are actually using dynamic pricing?
I think it's important to understand, the percentage of your market, or at least get a good idea of how many people in your market are using some form of dynamic pricing. But even that definition of dynamic pricing is hard. We kind of have an internal one where we say if you have like more than 20 unique pricing seasons throughout a given calendar year, we call that dynamic pricing. Nobody's really managing 20 static seasonal strategies. That's just crazy. Anything fewer, you're probably doing high season, low season, shoulder, and then events. My recommendations for property managers are really to, instead of looking at direct competitors and sort of what they're doing, put yourselves in the shoes of the guest and understand how one of your guests or an average guest in your market is actually going about booking in your market. The reason why I don't like to use comp sets or anything that's calling out like one property against 5 or 10 properties is because guests aren't doing that. If I'm going to book a stay in New York City, I'm not going through and picking out 10 listings, getting them all up and looking at all of them. I'm going to an aggregator like Google or maybe a direct booking website that I know or Airbnb, and I'm typing in the broad level market where I want to go, the dates, maybe a bedroom count, things like that. And then I'm getting all my results, probably hundreds, if not thousands of results. From there, I'm kind of whittling down pricing, photos, all that good stuff. And that journey, I think, is really where you can have the most amount of impact as a revenue manager. So instead of working your way backward from that list with like competitors, I encourage everybody like audit your own properties within that flow for a guest, because that's ultimately how most people are booking. Sure, there's maybe repeat guests who come directly to you or, do know maybe some of your competitors and kind of pull up those websites. But the majority of people are starting with a very broad search and then, going down that funnel to where they ultimately land on a property in the market. So it's better to understand, okay, how am I pricing compared to all the 2 bedrooms in my market or in this specific neighborhood? 2 bedroom, 1 bathrooms, 2 bedroom with certain amenities. Like, that's going to help you better understand how to really effectively market your properties to some of these guests versus having to worry about 5 specific competitors when you might just be spinning your wheels there and completely missing the bigger picture that guests are actually seeing.
Maximize your holiday-let revenue with Beyond. Are you leaving money on the table with outdated pricing? Beyond is the global leader in revenue management for short-term rentals, helping hosts and property managers boost revenue by up to 35% with real-time market insights, automated pricing updates, and AI-driven strategies. Beyond takes the guesswork out of setting rates so you can earn more while doing less. Join thousands of successful hosts who price smarter, fill more nights, and maximize profits. Try Beyond today and watch your revenue soar. Visit beyondpricing.com to get started. And what percentage of property managers are actually using dynamic pricing tool?
Yeah, it's we did a survey I think about a little over a year ago now, and we were a little bit shocked at the results. I believe we were still looking at like less than 20% of the global supply using that definition that I explained earlier of dynamic pricing. There are still a lot of people out there who are even like flat pricing, maybe a weekday weekend rate, maybe a high season, low season, but literally for half the year being at $200, the other half of the year being at $150 a night. That is still very prevalent, even for some property managers. I think we talk a lot about the professional property management aspect of our industry, but there still are a lot of property managers and revenue managers who are more confident in sort of manually setting their own prices and really honing in on that pricing strategy without using dynamic pricing. So I was a little bit surprised on those results. Ultimately means there's still plenty of room for growth. And I would still consider most people using a dynamic pricing tool to be kind of like an early adopter in the industry, depending on the sophistication. I think there's still a lot of opportunity for property managers to use dynamic pricing and stand out in their market. Not only for raising rates in periods of high demand, but the other half of it is making sure you're competitively priced when there isn't a lot of demand, so you can book occupancy, you can drive additional revenue through just getting extra nights booked. Versus like what I think most people go to is dynamic pricing is going to increase my rates a ton. Yes, that happens during high demand, but we're also just trying to get you booked and make sure your prices are optimized for when the market's not going to be anywhere near a sellout.
100%. Yeah. I think I started using dynamic pricing about 2019-ish. So I feel like a very, very early adopter now. And take it from me, people, if you're not using dynamic pricing, give it a try, because you might be shocked at the amount of extra revenue that you can earn. I certainly left a lot of money on the table. A couple of things before we finish then, Ryan. I just want to touch on AI a little bit. I mean, how much does AI power what you're doing at Beyond?
Yeah, certainly our favorite buzzword over the past couple of years now at this point. I think AI has been super helpful on a couple things that we've launched recently. I think from a revenue management standpoint, especially like a software standpoint, it's been really helpful in helping our users understand, again, that mountain of data, all the charts we're showing, all the different types of reports, being able to consolidate sort of performance summaries or an analysis for users day to day to share with owners, use it to sort of inform their own investment strategy. That's been a very helpful, like generative AI aspect of the tool that we've used. I will say, like since day one, machine learning has been more powerful for us on the back end. So that's typically what we talk about when it comes to, again, like cleaning a lot of that data automatically, not having to do it manually with like an engineer or something like that, and being able to use machine learning to identify and help us really comb through a lot of this data. But also, be able to go through different levels of tests within our algorithm. We're not working with the same Beyond Pricing algorithm that launched 12 years ago. It's probably on its like 1,000th iteration at this point. And so we use a lot of machine learning to basically test, ultimately, if we're rolling out a new algorithm feature like occupancy-based pricing or negative event factors, using a lot of machine learning to understand what impacts that could have for some of our users before we even launch it. So that's usually how our team uses machine learning to really test out certain features that we're adding to the algorithm, and if it makes sense to move forward with that for every single market and every single user. That's really been our core over the past, really 10 years. And then more recently, adding in more AI features in the tool just to help people understand where we're coming from a data standpoint and then a recommendation standpoint on the pricing side, and just making sense of, all of the data that's available. That's one thing I wanted to call out too. Like since 2019, 2020, there's been an explosion of data available in this industry, and that's great. But the other half of it is making sure you can understand what to do with that data. Just having it, looking at it, maybe makes you feel good. But if you're not able to translate that into strategic updates, then you're really kind of missing out on a big piece there. And I think we've been able to use AI to help people get to that point and translate it into, content that's easier to digest.
Now we're going to finish by talking tofu, which is your pretty exciting analyzer tool, which is on the website. So tell us about this, especially for those hosts out there who maybe want to try Beyond or give dynamic pricing a try. Just tell us how important and interesting this tool is.
Yeah, so we've launched a listing analyzer that makes it super easy for you to understand what Beyond could do for your property. So you could drop in a link from VRBO, Booking.com, Airbnb directly in there, and we'll automatically show you how much more money you could be making with Beyond and how we do it. It's not just tossing up a big number. It really walks you through, okay, we're going to optimize your calendar here. Here's what we're seeing in your market. And then it can even get you into more market data for your specific market. So it's been super helpful in showing people, especially hosts early on, with the power of dynamic pricing and what it can do for your business. And it also helps us really show people, before we even take over a pricing strategy, which we understand is it's a big deal for anybody managing a property. Your pricing strategy is so core to your business and ultimately what you're trying to do with your business, whether that's grow, maintain, add owners, whatever it might be. Taking over a pricing strategy is a lot of work, and we don't take it lightly. So what this tool really helps us do is show people beforehand what will happen before they actually enable, before they even create an account with Beyond, what's going to happen with their pricings and ultimately what they can see from that. So it's been super helpful, but it's also really great if you're, wanting to buy a 2-bedroom in a market, find a 2-bedroom on Airbnb that looks similar, plug it into the tool, and we'll show you how much it can make in like less than 20 seconds. So it's a quick analyzer for you to be, seeing some of that revenue with some of the market data that we see. And then we even open it up past that if you're interested in more data. Later this month, we'll be launching a free version of our market insights for folks to use. So that will be even more data for people to access coming out of that listing analyzer tool. So that's available today on our website. Anybody can go check it out. And like I said, you just got to plug in a listing. We keep it easy, and we'll show you how much money you can make.
I've tried it myself. It is brilliant. If you're doing any research on if you want to buy a property in a certain location or you just want to check out what your property could earn next, really, really useful. So head to the Beyond website and check it out. Ryan, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for explaining all about the science that's going on behind the scenes at Beyond. It's been great to chat to you.
Thank you, James. Happy to be here. If you want to talk for 5 more hours on data, I'm happy to. We'll find some more time to do so.
Awesome. We will put your LinkedIn in the show notes so that people can contact you directly and organize those chats. Thanks, Ryan.
Love it. Thank you.
Great to chat to Ryan Saylor there. Make sure you give that property analyzer tool a try. All right, that's it for today's episode of STR Pricing Secrets. Remember, this series is sponsored by Beyond. And if you'd like to try their dynamic pricing tool, head to beyondpricing.com. For more free education, tips, and trends from the STR industry, visit houseplanet.club, where you can sign up for our newsletter, listen to our podcasts, and download a suite of ebooks for hosts and property managers. That's it for today's episode. Until next time, happy hosting.